Good afternoon, everyone. Catherine McKenzie, our guest today, was born and raised in Montreal, Canada. A graduate of McGill in history and law, Catherine practices law in Montreal. An avid runner and skier, she's the author of numerous bestsellers, including Hidden, Fractured, The Good Liar, and I'll Never Tell. Her works have been translated into multiple languages, and today she's going to discuss her latest, I'll Never Tell. Here she is, Catherine.
Hi, thanks for having me. So I'm holding up my book for those who are watching visually, I'll Never Tell. It's a murder mystery set at a summer camp. It's about a family of 5 adult children whose parents die suddenly, and they inherit the camp, which is a valuable property in the Eastern Townships outside of Montreal. And they all gather over Labor Day weekend to read the will and decide what to do with the property. But before they can do that, something happened to a girl 20 years earlier at camp, and they have to solve the mystery of what happened to Amanda before they can move ahead. And when I originally thought of this book, I thought of it as a Agatha Christie meets The Nest. So a traditional Agatha Christie murder mystery where there's a set group of people who are all often in a remote location, and you know one of them did it, but you don't know who, and hopefully until the end. But I blended that with a family saga. So the book is told through 7 narrators, who the 5 family members, another person who lives on the property, and then the girl, Amanda, from 20 years ago, the night in question. And I was inspired to write this book because I'd had a bunch of ideas for quite a long time that had all been mulling in my brain that coalesced. So I spent many summers at a summer camp in the Eastern Townships. And I always thought that that would be a great setting for a book, but I didn't know what book. And then I wanted to tell a reunion story for a long time. I think that when people reunite with people from the past, they often behave differently than they would in their normal lives. And I wanted to tell a sort of classic Agatha Christie story. And so one day those all merged in my mind, and the McAllister family, who's the family at the heart of this book, kind of emerged. It feels like fully formed, though it always seems like that. Once the book is done, I have a rosy glow about the process of writing the book, which is not always reflective of reality. But I do feel like this book I actually wrote fairly quickly and fairly easily for me. It was the 9th novel that I've written that's been published. My 10th novel, You Can't Catch Me, is this is actually the American cover, but it's coming out in Canada in August. I think this was really, I'll Never Tell, though, was really probably the first pure murder mystery that I ever wrote. And I remember when I was writing the scene where the girl is attacked, posting online that I was about to commit my first murder. And that is one of the fun things about being an author, is that you do get to do things that you wouldn't ordinarily have a chance to do, or one hopes not. Anyway, so I thought that this would be more fun if it was interactive. So there's a bunch of ways that we can do that interactive element. If you're on Zoom, at the bottom, there's a Q&A function. You can also raise your hand and ask a question. You just need to unmute yourself. And I think that Danielle can facilitate that too. So if people had any questions to ask, perhaps we could have a discussion that way.
Hi, Catherine. So I'm going to ask the question because I'm from the Eastern Townships.
Okay.
So why the Eastern Townships?
Well, I spent, like I said, 9 summers at a summer camp on Lake Lovering, which is near Magog in the Eastern Townships. My husband and I also own a property in the township. So it's just an area that for me has a really deep sense of place. It's one of those places that I know what it smells like. I know what it sounds like. I know what the summer feels like there. And I think a lot of reviews of the book have mentioned the sense of place in this book. And I wanted I've written a lot of books that weren't set anywhere specific, or even if they were, it was vague, but I really wanted to challenge myself to set a book in a place where I could make people imagine exactly where it was. And so this place, which is special to me, came to mind.
So I have a question. I know that for younger viewers who are watching who are maybe interested in writing, can you tell us about when you knew this was something you wanted to do sort of professionally, and also as a kid, what types of books did you read? Did you keep a journal? Like, what are the things that writers or future writers should be doing now?
Well, I definitely was a big reader, and I think that anybody who's a writer should be a big reader. And I was a big reader as a kid. Was actually just having a text thread with my mom and my sister today, because my sister was asking if Lord of the Flies was appropriate for an 11-year-old, which then devolved into a conversation about all the inappropriate books my sister and I read, much younger than I think my mom knew. She thought she had pre-read every book that we had read, and I found that pretty funny. So I think I've always been a big reader, and anybody who has an interest in writing, I think that's important. I was never a journal keeper. It's just not something that works for me. It always felt artificial, but I think if that's something that you enjoy doing, it can definitely help you. Anything that gets you writing. So working for a newspaper, working on the yearbook. My undergraduate degree in history, I had to write a lot of papers. I think that really helped. And as to whether I knew I wanted to be a writer, I never actually had that explicit thought. I wrote growing up. I wrote poetry, but I never really wrote short stories or attempted a novel. I think a couple of times I would read a book that I really liked, and then I'd go think, oh, I'll just like rewrite this book. So I remember that happened with Foucault's Pendulum. And then I realized I'd have to do 3 years of research, and I abandoned that after 15 pages. But it really wasn't until I was in my 30s and already established in my law practice that I had an idea that kind of wouldn't leave me alone, that led to me eventually writing what I call my practice novel, which lives in a drawer in the room that I'm in right now, actually. And then I took it from there. So I didn't actually make a conscious decision until I started trying to find an agent that I was going to write a book that was going to be published.
The characters in your stories, how close are they to people that you know? And does that cause conflicts or problems if your friends sort of recognize themselves in your books?
Well, I actually try to consciously not write about people that I know. I think starting out, that was just something I wanted to make sure to do. And now that I've written 10, 11 novels, I've kind of would have run out of people to write about anyway. My life's not that interesting. But I think sometimes people think that the books are about me or about people that I know. And I take that as a compliment. I think that means that I've done my job of making the characters realistic. But I could not have lived out all of the things that I've written about in my books. And I think that idea comes from, and I think it's important to know that you don't have to do that. And I'm actually a little bit against doing that, to be honest. I think people hear write what you know. That's a common thread that people hear all the time. And I think people confuse that with writing about themselves or people that they know. And I don't think that's what write what you know means. I think write what you know, to me anyway, means that you imagine situations and then you can imbue your characters with actions and reactions and emotions that maybe you've experienced in an analogous situation, but you don't have to have been in that exact situation. That's sort of the work of the author. And I think, what I did do here, and somebody, not me, came up with this phrase, which I thought was good, which is, I'll never tell is based on a true location, but not true events. So I think that there's other ways of grounding your stories than trying to capture somebody that you know, or an aspect about them. And just to build on that, I have occasionally met somebody in a passing who was completely outrageous. And I've been like, oh, I have to put this person in a book because you couldn't make this up. And the few times that I've done that, people have actually said to me that they didn't find those characters to be realistic. And I puzzled about that for a long time. I wondered, am I just bad at writing real people? Like, why is that? And I think I finally came to the conclusion that it was because I had not done the work to make them fully fleshed out characters because they were just caricatures of people that I had met in passing. So I think that my personal advice is to try to, it's not that hard to make up people, honestly. You know, you can take a characteristic of somebody that you know, but I think it's better to try and people your books with truly fictional characters if you're writing fiction.
Yeah, I just have another question, and I think somebody may have raised their hand, so we'll get to them. Somebody like Stephen King writes about or writes in locations that he's familiar with, and it's not necessarily the most popular locations in the world. So you're writing about the Eastern Townships. Have you gotten feedback from people from the rest of Canada or from the States who do they even notice? Do they care, or it's just some random place and it could be anywhere, and maybe it's interesting to people from Quebec, but really it doesn't make a difference?
Yeah. I think what has been consistent is that everyone who's gone to summer camp who's read the book has said that it reminded them of their summer camp and that they could see their own summer camp in it. So that I had invoked camp and what camp feels like, even if the layout of the camp in the book is different than the layout of their camp, there are a lot of similarities between summer camps. So I've definitely gotten that comment. And then for the people who know Wilbekin, which is the camp that it's based on in the townships, or some people have read it without realizing that it was Wilbekin and I actually said, oh, this reminds me so much of Wilbekin. And I'm like, oh, because it is. And then people that I know who read it, who went there, I know it was passed around among the camp staff last year. I think that was an extra added fun tidbit for people who know the actual physical location. But yeah, I think, I don't know about you, but for me as a reader, I like reading about places that I haven't necessarily been. I also like reading books that are not all set in New York City. I think a lot of books get set in a very few big US cities, and that can be a limited point of view.
Right. Danielle, so we have some people on the line. Now, the way it would work, if you're listening on the telephone today, we haven't tried this before, but we could try it now. We could maybe call on you if you have a question. If you don't, that's fine too. We also have some people who are watching us on Zoom. So maybe we can start with the folks on Zoom. If you are watching on Zoom and you look for the raise hand button on your Zoom app, that'll let us know that you're interested in asking a question. So we'll give folks a chance to do that.
Okay. Or you can just type one into the Q&A as well at the bottom of the screen. That's fine.
Okay, so I think we're going to put somebody on the spot. So the caller whose telephone number ends 2.
Yes. Oh, hi. Sorry. Why did you pick the same location all the time? I mean, like, did you you didn't want to try some other venue or something? Like some other part of Canada?
Oh, I don't pick the same location all the time. It's actually the first book that I've written that's set in the townships.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I have set books in a bunch of different locations. So I have one book that's set in Cincinnati. It's my book, Fractured. My book, The Good Liar, is partly set in Chicago and partly set in Montreal. I have other books where it's just called The City. It's not named. It's a northeastern city. You might recognize parts of Montreal in it if you read it. I've sometimes made up towns. So I've made up a town called Springfield for my book Hidden, and I made up another town called Nelson, which was a bad name to use because there is, of course, a real Nelson in Canada, which people pointed out to me after the fact, which of course I knew. So I've really mixed things up. But I've set my books into a bunch of different locations.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, thanks. So we are going to go to the caller whose telephone number ends 3. Do you have a question for Catherine?
No, I don't, because I just came in. I missed the beginning.
Oh, well, do you like murder mystery sort of? I
do.
Well, we have a recommendation for you.
Okay.
Catherine McKenzie's book gets great reviews. It's available online. You can order it. It'll be shipped to your home. Danielle, do you know if we have copies at the library's Hoopla and other services as ebooks?
It's normally available through Overdrive if you guys have that.
We do. Okay, great. Okay, go ahead, caller.
Yes,
I am here, and I just dial in every day, but I do not read mysteries. It's not my kind of reading, but I'm just interested in hearing about it. Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Okay. When did you, I guess I guess you've always been interested in all types of books, but what mystery authors growing up sort of influenced you?
I read most of Agatha Christie. I read Rex Stout. I read Dick Francis, Sue Grafton. Those are probably the big ones that I read growing up. And I love all those books, but because my parents were both big mystery readers, and so those were the books that were around my house growing up. So, yeah. But I never actually thought that I was going to write mysteries. I started off writing romantic comedies, and when I got my first book deal, I was very fortunate to have a lunch with Louise Penny, who my husband knew a little bit, and who was super generous in giving me a couple of hours of her time. And I thought it was generous at the time, and now when I think back, it's amazing to me that she took the time to do that. And I was talking to her at the time about my book, and of course she writes mysteries, and she asked also what I'd read, and I'd said, I mostly read mysteries, and she was like, well, maybe you'll start writing them. I was like, oh, I don't think so. I don't think my brain works that way. And then fast forward 10 years later, and I am writing mysteries and suspense. So it comes home to roost.
For those listening on the phone, you can't see this, but we can see in Catherine's the room that she's broadcasting from. There is a guitar in the corner. Do you play
That's
guitar?
True. I do play guitar.
And so, yeah, talk to me about that, because I mean, it's not that they're not connected, music and writing, but oftentimes people pick one or the other. So how did that come about?
Well, interestingly, I also didn't start guitar until I was actually before I was writing, but late in my 20s. I was in band in high school, and I played the flute, which is like the least cool instrument that there is to play, probably. And so I liked music, and I was good at it. And at some point in my 20s, I just decided I wanted to learn to play guitar, and one of my friends did as well. And so we started taking lessons together. And I did that probably for 8 or 9 years, and I got okay. And then I gave it up for a long time, and I've just restarted now in this pandemic. I have a little bit more time on my hands, and I've been meaning to take it up again for a while. So I now do Zoom guitar lessons with my guitar teacher.
Where do you write? Are you the type of person, is this too much of a cliche, you go to Starbucks, or, well, not now, but in the past, or like, where do you write?
I actually write anywhere. Most of my writing is probably done on so I'm in my study, and I'm on the nice big computer that I bought to write on, which I almost never use. And I write on my laptop on the couch in my living room, often with the TV playing. I found over the years that it's good for me, particularly when I'm doing first draft work, to have something else going on that distracts my brain a bit and allows me to be a bit freer in my writing and not overthink it. But I would still practice law. And until recently, I traveled a lot for my job, and also because of writing and just for pleasure. And I realized early on that I couldn't be somebody who needed to be in a fixed location to write, or I was going to be in trouble. So I write on, again, historically, wrote a lot on airplanes, on vacation, wherever I have my laptop, I can write.
So this mystery that you just finished, or that's out now, do you start with the ending in your mind, or do you start with like a sort of a scene that you can visualize and you work around it? Or how do you work?
So I always think of the concept first. So I had this idea of a family who needs to solve a mystery at the summer camp for the property. And so then I start thinking about that. and where that goes. And if I can't see the end, it's an idea that doesn't work or isn't ready to work for me. So before I started writing the book, I knew who the victim was. I knew why she had been killed, and I knew how she had been killed and by whom. So the who, what, when, where, why, I knew all of that. And I had some idea of a few twists. And then, so I spent some time thinking about that. I'm not a traditional outliner, so I don't have a written outline. I might have notes in a document. And so I just spent a lot of time thinking about that. And then once those pieces fall into place, usually the voice of one of the characters shows up. And by show up, it sounds a little crazy, but I will literally hear that voice in my head, and often with the first line. So the voices show up for me in book form. So the first line of I'll Never Tell is, we only started the lantern ceremony my second to last year at Camp Macaw. And that is in the voice of Amanda, who's the victim. And that is the first thing that came to me for the book. It's not always stayed the same, the very first line, but most of my books, the first line that I wrote is the first line of the book. And then I write the book linearly, even like as the reader reads it, even if the book is not told in a linear fashion. So that requires obviously keeping a lot of information in my head, but also keeping notes and having a very valuable first reader in my sister, who points out all my mistakes as I'm writing.
Danielle?
Yep. I see there is a question in the Q&A.
Yes.
Yep.
Do you have it in front of you? Yeah.
Yeah. So how does you being a lawyer help you in your writing? So there's a lot of lawyers and ex-lawyers who are writers, and I've been asked about that a lot. And I think that it does help you for a couple of reasons. I think that particularly if you do litigation, which is what I do, it's storytelling. So when you begin a lawsuit, it starts with a written document that sets out the facts. And when you're arguing a case to a judge, you're going through the facts and you're framing them and shaping them in a way that is hopefully compelling, so the judge comes to the conclusion that you want. Because judges are not computers, and things don't end up in court because they're black and white. They end up in court because they're gray. Either the evidence is not totally clear or the law isn't totally clear. So I think for sure legal training is good for storytelling purposes, and it hones your writing. And if you're a good legal writer, I think it can help you be a good storyteller. I think also that lawyers tend to be driven, type A people who are good about deadlines and getting things done. And we all know lots of people, and sometimes we have been those people who are like, oh, I want to write a book someday, or I have an idea for a book, but I don't have the time. And I think that lawyers and other people too, but are good at actually making the time and finding the time and getting it done. And then once it is done, of taking that sort of extra step of getting it published. So I think, at least for me, that's how my law practice has helped me. And it helps me still because I'm always working on a deadline in my professional life. And books need deadlines too, or they don't get finished. And so it's about imposing that sort of same kind of discipline and treating it as a job. It's a creative job, but it's a job. Writing novels is a job.
So your website is Catherine, that's Catherine with a C, CatherineMcKenzie.com. Where else can people find you on all the social media?
So I'm on Facebook as Catherine McKenzie Author, on Instagram, same thing, and on Twitter at CEMckenzie1.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was excellent. And I'm sure everyone either tuning in by computer or by phone knows a little bit more about writing mysteries now. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Catherine.
Take care, everyone. Stay safe. Stay home.